Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Florida has long been known as a land of extremes. Swamps and pine barrens, remote prairie, coastline, farmland, dense suburban development all exist side by side, creating a landscape where the natural and the unnatural often seem to overlap. Now, over the years, witnesses from every part of the state have described things that do not fit any accepted category. Now, some reports involve winged humanoids, others monstrous canines, bizarre upright predators, or strange entities glimpsed only for a moment yet remembered for a lifetime. Now, tonight we're going to examine 9 such accounts, each one different in appearance and circumstance, but all carrying that same unmistakable mark of the unexplained. Now, what makes these cases so compelling is that they don't point to one simple answer. Instead, they suggest a broader pattern of anomalies that run through Florida itself. Now, these are not stories from one town or one brief wave of sightings. They come from the Panhandle, Central Florida, the Gulf Coast, South Florida, and the Keys and beyond. Some witnesses were children when it happened. Others were hardened adults who believed only in logic and ordinary explanations. But each of them came away with the same conclusion. They saw, heard, or felt something they couldn't explain. And in many cases, something they have never forgotten. Florida also occupied a peculiar place in the American paranormal map. It's famous for skunk ape lore, ghost stories, phantom cats, unexplained lights, but beneath those more familiar legends lie other layer of, testimony that is far harder to classify. Now, these are reports that blur the line between cryptid supernatural manifestation and something perhaps even stranger. A flying gargoyle near Zephyr Hills, a giant feline thing that rises upright in broad daylight, a dark entity in the water that seems to move with intent, an owl-headed being standing calmly at the edge of the woods. Each report sounds different, yet together they form a body of evidence that deserves serious attention. So tonight, we're not looking at folklore and abstract. We're looking at firsthand testimony from people who insist that for a few moments, the world stopped behaving the way it should. These are not polished legends. These are fragments of lived experience, strange, personal, and deeply unsettling. And as we move through each account, one after another, the bigger question begins to emerge. Are these simply isolated anomalies or glimpses of a hidden reality that has been surfacing in Florida for far longer than most people realize? Now, Florida has produced no shortage of strange reports over the years, but certain regions seem to generate recurring descriptions that are simply too specific to ignore. Pasco County, including the Zephyr Hills and Dade City corridor, is one of those places. Repeatedly, witnesses from that area have described gargoyle-like winged beings, human-shaped forms in flight, and encounters that linger in memory long after the event itself. Now, the following testimony is especially notable because it reaches back into childhood, long before the witness had any framework for what they may have seen. What stayed with him was not a vague impression or dreamlike fragment, but vivid images of a flying human-like figure with flapping wings, something he would only much later realize sounded disturbingly, and it sounded disturbingly similar to other reports in the same area. Now, the following account was recently submitted by a 30-year-old man who was born in Brooksville, Florida, and says he has lived in the area his entire life. He explained that his Hispanic family often attended dance halls and large parties in Dade City and Zephyr Hills when he was a child, which was common in those communities. On one occasion, which he believes took place when he was about 6 or 7 years old, he attended what was likely a quinceanera with his parents, aunts, uncles, younger brothers and cousins, and other relatives. As the celebration stretched late into the night, he and his little brother, an older cousin, and other children went behind the party to play. He emphasized that even though he was young at the time, the memory has stayed vivid with him. Now, according to the witness, several of the children noticed something moving through the air. He described it as resembling a human body in flight, streamlined in the air, similar to how Superman is often depicted, except that the figure's arms were not extended in flight. He also stated that the wings were visibly flapping. Now, he's very familiar with sandhill cranes and their appearance, and he firmly rejects that explanation. He said he knows exactly what a sandhill crane looks and sounds like, and what he observed was nothing like that. Instead, he recalled something that appeared distinctly human in form and, in his present-day words, resembled a gargoyle. The witness said the figure did not appear small, especially from a child's perspective. The image remained with him for years, though he did not know how to interpret it. Then, roughly 5 years ago, after becoming deeply interested in cryptids in America, he came across a YouTube segment discussing the so-called gargoyle of Zephyr Hills. That discovery stunned him. He realized that others had reported seeing something very similar in the same general area. Now, while he is not demanding belief and is careful not to insist on one explanation, he remains adamant that what he saw was not fiction, not imagination, and not even a bird. He still does not know exactly what it was, only that it looked very human and has remained unexplained in his mind ever since. So what makes the first Pasco County account so compelling is not simply the image of something winged in flight, but the fact that the memory survived intact from childhood into adulthood. The witness did not build the story from folklore. He carried the image for years before later discovering that others had reported a nearly identical gargoyle-like being in the same general corridor. That's where these cases begin to take on real weight, not as isolated impressions, but as fragments of a larger and persistent pattern. And from a possible flying humanoid seen in childhood, we move into something even more physically imposing. Because the next witness did not describe a fleeting shape in the sky. She and her mother watched a massive black feline-like creature rise upright in broad daylight and calmly stare them down on a rural road in Florida. Now, the witness states, my mother and I were driving eastbound on Highway 22 between Panama City and Hitchcock, Florida, sometime between 7:15 and 7:30 in the morning in July of 2007. We had just gone to the bank and were heading back home. It was a sunny morning, the windows were down, and we were just talking as we drove. We were the only vehicle in that stretch of road. On both sides, there were several acres of open farmland with long lines of pine trees further back. And as we drove, I noticed something black moving through the reed grass off the roadside. At first, I assumed it was a dog because I could only make out the hind quarters. It was not running. It was simply moving through the grass at a steady pace. As I slowed the truck, I realized the animal was larger than I had first thought. It was probably about 150 yards away, and it suddenly jumped into the middle of the road. Now, at that point, it was down on all fours, and my immediate impression was that it looked like a huge black panther. I stopped the truck, and both of us just stared at it. Then, without warning, the creature rose up onto its hind legs. It just stood there facing us. We were in a Chevy Colorado, so it was squarely facing the front of the truck. My best estimate was that it stood around 9 to 10 foot tall. I was shocked and confused. My mother, who was sitting in the passenger seat and was in her 70s at the time, immediately started screaming. She was terrified. Now, what I saw was not a normal animal. It had a large head, though not oversized for the rest of its body, pointed cat ears, and distinctly feline nose. Its eyes were greenish gray and looked like a cat's eyes. The chest was broad, the arms were long and muscular, but not overly bulky, and the hands were elongated with pads on the inside and huge razor-like claws. Its lower body was also cat-like, with large legs and enormous feet. In fact, the feet looked so oversized that at a glance they almost gave the impression of having 4 feet instead of 2. Its body was covered in thick, shiny black hair. I also noticed a short tail with what I looked like a ball or curl on the end. At no point did it open its mouth, so I never saw its teeth. Even so, I had the distinct impression that it was male, and I remember thinking that if it wanted to move fast, it probably could. Now, what struck me the most was that it did not behave aggressively. It simply looked at us almost as though it was wondering why we were there. There was no charge, no threat display, no rush towards the vehicle. And after a short time, it turned and walked off across the field. Now, the strangest part was the way it moved on its hind legs. It seemed to flow rather than stomp or lumber. It eventually disappeared from sight. The whole encounter lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Afterward, my mother told me that she felt overwhelming fear and believed the animal was going to eat her alive. I didn't feel that same fear. I was more confused than anything else. My main thought was wondering why it had allowed us to see it so clearly. I drove that road many times after that, but I never saw it again. And I eventually moved away from the area. Now, that Bay County encounter forces us into an uncomfortable category of reports that investigators hear more often than most people realize. Cases where a witness first thinks that they're looking at a known animal only to watch it do something impossible. In this instance, a large black cat-like form began something else entirely when it stood on its 2 legs, revealing a body structure that didn't fit any conventional explanation of wildlife. Now, while that creature seemed strangely calm, and the next account carries a far dark emotional atmosphere. In Manatee County, near the Myakka region, the witness was not only disturbed by what he saw near a tree line, he was equally shaken by what it did to his dogs. Animals that were normally fearless but suddenly reduced to trembling panic. Now, the witness states, "Let me say first and foremost, I'm a man of logic, of explanation. I never believed in ghosts or strange creatures, at least not seriously, but something happened the other night that left me with a feeling I still cannot shake. I live in Manatee County, Florida, in an area between town and open country, not far from Yaku River State Park. Now, we get plenty of normal wildlife out here: foxes, coyotes, raccoons, all of that is common enough. Because there's a lot of wildlife around and because many people keep chickens, most of us also keep large dogs. I have two pit bulls, a 70-pound male and a 60-pound female. They're fearless dogs. They know that this is their property, and if they hear something outside, they let me know immediately. Usually if I open the door, they charge out to run off whatever is out there. Now, the other night, I woke up for no reason at all. The first thing I noticed was how unnaturally quiet it was outside. There were no crickets, no night sounds, nothing. Then I realized my dogs were not on the bed where they normally sleep. A moment later, I heard a howl unlike anything I've ever heard in my life. It went off like a siren and sent a chill straight down through me. It was deep, almost like a yell, but it was definitely animal in origin. I turned on the lights and found both my pit bulls huddled in the back of their crate, trembling. I had never seen them act like that before. They were not alert or aggressive. They were terrified. That scared me more than the howl did. I turned the lights back off, grabbed the flashlight, and looked out the back window. About 200 yards away near the tree line behind my property, I saw something standing there. I couldn't make out every detail because it was so dark, but what I saw looked like some kind of dog-shaped thing with an unusual build. The closest comparison I can make is a hyena. It had a heavy front end and large neck with thick fur or a mane and thinner hind legs. Its head looked wolf-like with upright ears and a large skull. That struck me most was its size. It was huge. Its body looked so black that it almost swallowed the light, making it hard to pick out clear features, but I could still see enough to know that it was nothing like a coyote or stray dog or even a normal animal that I'd ever seen. The whole scene just felt wrong. Its presence seemed to press down on everything around it. The silence, the fear of my dogs, and the way the woods seemed dead around it, all of it felt connected. So the next morning, I went out to the spot where I'd seen it. I looked for tracks, hair, anything at all, but I found nothing. Still, I know what I saw, and I've never seen anything like it before. I have to ask if anyone else in Florida has seen anything like this. There have been a lot of dead dogs in the area lately, including large dogs killed by something. Other people say it's coyotes or maybe feral dogs, but from what I saw, I'm not convinced. The fear of my dogs told me that this is no ordinary animal, and that what still bothers me the most. Now, that detail matters. Again and again, in incredible cryptid reports, animals react before people fully understand what's happening. Dogs refuse to engage, woods fall silent, the environment seems to flatten under an unnatural presence. In this case, the witness was left with the impression of something canine, immense, heavily built, and deeply wrong. Not merely a predator, but a presence. Now, from that dark tree line in inland Florida, we now shift to the water, because not every unexplained encounter comes with a clear silhouette or visible anatomy. Sometimes the horror lies in the touch alone. The next witness in Key West never got a clean look at what surrounded and grabbed her in the surf, but the physical sensation and lingering psychological pull never left her. She tells me, I had an experience in Key West at the southernmost point near the monument that I have never been able to explain. It was just before dusk, that uneasy time of evening when water darkens, the ocean seems to change character. I was about 20 yards from shore, and all at once I became aware of how empty the beach had become. A few people were still around, but my small group of friends who had been drying off and getting ready for the ride home were already packing up. Then a wave of intense awareness came over me. I suddenly felt the vastness of the ocean around me and realized almost all at once just how far from shore I had drifted. The tide had risen near to my chin. I felt cool currents moving across my body, and it gave me a strange, airy sensation that I quickly scanned the water around me. That is when I saw an enormous dark patch moving towards me. Terrified, I started back towards the beach immediately. I kept watching that dark mass, trying to understand what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was seaweed, but the longer I looked, the more it seemed like to be following me. By then, the water was at my chest and the tide was pushing me toward shore. What I had soon was drifting cloud of seaweed was now surrounding me. I did not want to scream or panic. Then I felt it. A cold hand closing around my calf. I called out to my two friends on the beach who were still some distance away and tried to tell them something was grabbing my leg. They laughed and taunted me, telling me I'd better swim faster. My heart was pounding so violently that I did not dare yell any louder. I honestly believed that if I panicked, whatever had a hold of me would drag me under. As I kept my eyes on the beach, I glanced down every few seconds, trying to make out the shape, some type of shape or whatever was beneath me. I could not see its color or texture. I could only feel the size of its hands and its deliberate way it held me. Strangely, the grip seemed to loosen whenever I tensed up. At last, I made it into shower of water about a waist deep, and I began jumping hard until it finally let go. When I stumbled out of the water, I turned and saw that a large cloud of seaweed was moving quickly back into deeper water. Now, what struck me most was that I was moving against the tide, even while driftwood and other debris were washing on toward shore. Now, years later, I told my twin brother about what had happened, and to my surprise, he told me he had an experience something very similar on a remote beach in Miami. In his case, he thought the thing had grabbed his thigh, felt like a dead man with extremely large hands. He also described it happening in the evening with seaweed appearing out of nowhere. I was stunned at how closely his details matched my own experience. His girlfriend was there and later confirmed what he had reported. Since then, I have taken 3 cruises, and every time I stare into the ocean, I feel something I can't fully explain. I get a strange sensation, and I hear what sounds like distant blue whales calling, just loud enough to catch my attention. Then a peaceful feeling comes over me, almost like an invitation, making me want to jump overboard and go into the depths. I have never acted on it, but the pull is there whenever I look down into the open water. Now, the ocean has always been one of the most difficult theaters of anomaly investigation. Light distortions, current movements, and the depth all work against certainty. Yet some of the most chilling testimony comes from witnesses who insist they felt intelligent, deliberate contact from something beneath the surface. And in this case, what makes the experience more disturbing is not the grip on her leg, but the later confirmation that her twin brother described a remarkably similar encounter elsewhere in Florida. We now return from the shoreline to the Panhandle, where the next witness described an encounter that sounds less like an unexplained animal sighting and more like an outright supernatural assault. A gigantic black canine pursued her vehicle, leaped onto the car, and then vanished into a cemetery, leaving behind questions what remain unresolved to this day. The witness states, "Hi, Lon. I have been interested in your post about hellhounds and crawlers. I decided to send you an event that happened to me. This was around 2015, not sure which month, but it was around 11 p.m. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. My dad owns 75 acres of spooky property. We live in the Florida Panhandle. Anyway, I was driving. I had just started down a long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more often than you would believe. I'm nearing the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh, well, probably a deer. I shake it off. We have tons of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to occasional bears. But then it starts chasing me. Now, please keep in mind that this is somewhat normal to me. I have tons of weird stuff that happens, and it's not like it was just barreling at me. It was moving after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So I kept my pace. I turned onto the highway and speed up to about 50 miles an hour. I keep noticing something in my peripheral, though, and so I slowed down and started looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. Now, I grew up with larger dogs. My aunt had a St. Bernard mix, and I've had various large dogs. This thing was literally the size of my car. Bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are like the docile kind. Okay, now I'm freaking out. I gun it. I'm releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. It was a poorly kept 95 Honda Accord. I couldn't seem to shake it for long. So, in an act of bravery or stupidity, I pull over to a church parking lot thinking maybe some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light of or onto church land. Well, was I ever wrong? I stop and take out my phone to call my boyfriend. In that period, it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see, feel, and hear the metal popping and creaking, and I see drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. It jumps off my car onto the hood where I get a glimpse of it before it goes into the cemetery and disappears. It was a gated cemetery, so it jumps the fence. It was definitely a dog, built like a Rottweiler pit bull mix, but darker and larger. It was solid black with paws the size of dinner plates, had a huge head almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm so thankful. Now, I called my boyfriend crying. He calmed me down, listened, and told me to take pictures when I get home. And I did, or I tried at least. By the time I got to my mom's, the only thing left was a single dent in the roof of my car and some faint claw marks that were more like indentations in the middle. Why did the damage disappear? Well, that's a good question. I have no idea. That is where the Florida canine mystery begins to move beyond simple cryptozoology and into something far stranger. The witness was not describing a glimpse at a distance. She heard the metal strain, saw the drool left on felt the weight of the vehicle, and then later found that most of the apparent damage had somehow faded or disappeared. Reports like that are why old hellhound tradition refuses to go away. Now, some witnesses are convinced that these are not merely unknown animals, but something supernatural crossing briefly into view. And yet, Florida also gives us encounters that refuse to stay in a single category. Now, the next report out of Polk County does not describe a canine, a cat, or even a standard winged being or humanoid. Instead, the witness stood face to face with something that seemed to combine the head of a great owl with the upright form and presence of a cloaked being. Now, the witness tells me it was afternoon in late May in the year 2021. I remember it was later in the afternoon, early evening, but it was slightly overcast, gray days, so I can't tell you from memory whether it was dusk or earlier. I lived near a nature conservation area in Central Florida. My husband and I are very fortunate to find our property, ample acreage, heavily wooded to the point where we could not see our neighbors or any lights from their homes. We lovingly called our home the swamp. Now, I was outside in our driveway, which is only cleared space on our land, save for a natural circular clearing in our woods. I was walking back to our porch when, for some reason, I was compelled to look turn and look back at the tree line, which is around 80 to 100 foot from the house. Now, I do want to note that there was not a single ounce of fear in me. In fact, I was quite calm when I made eye contact with it. At first, it didn't register what I was looking at. I knew it was an owl, which for my woods is not an uncommon sighting. But then it kind of shifted, and I saw more of it. It was not just an owl. It was a head of an owl on what I can only describe as the shoulders of a human. And it looked like it was wearing a dark cloak, either made of dark foliage or feathers. It was tall, and from the trees around it, I guessed around 7 foot or so. It just looked at me and I looked at it. I looked around and blinked, sincerely thinking it was a trick of the lighting, or my mind created a thing where there was nothing. But no, when I looked back, it was still there, calm and unmoving. I was still unafraid, which is not normal for me, as I can freak myself out easily. And for some reason, I felt another urge, this time to nod. I nodded towards it, acknowledging it. It felt natural and right to do so, then turned and went into my home. I did not go back outside that day, but the next morning I went back outside and stood at the same place on my porch to look at what it may have been. And there was nothing. I couldn't even remotely try to place it as it, the space where it stood was between two trees at the opening of the forest line, leading back into a small clearing. There was no low-hanging branches, no large leaves, no anything that it could trick myself into believing of what it actually had seen. And I haven't seen it since. Now, I did some light searching online, but found nothing even remotely close, so I let it go. Until today, when I heard that story about an hour ago. Does someone know what this might be? Has anyone else in Central Florida or anywhere else seen anything like this? Now, the witness later added that there has been a couple of times when in my car there have been remnants of what I could describe as guts when I've been parked under a tree instead of the carport. I've always chalked it up to a large bird, hawk, or owl, which is still the most probable. Still gives me shivers. I contacted the witness to gather more information. This encounter occurred in the Green Swamp Preserve area in Polk County. There have been a lot of unexplained accounts of winged humanoid beings in that region, notably gargoyle-like flying beings. The natural owl species known to inhabit the area do not match the account's description. The largest is a great horned owl. Now, this is one of those reports that resist reduction because the witness was neither panicked nor confused in the moment. She remained calm, made eye contact, and even felt compelled to acknowledge the being with a nod. That is a very different emotional profile from most fear-based encounters, and it raises a question that surfaces in many humanoid cases. Are some of these manifestations hostile, while others are merely observant, territorial, even interactive in a way we just don't understand yet? Now, from a tall, owl-headed figure in the Green Swamp region, we now move to a smaller but equally baffling sighting near Jacksonville. Because not every witness describes something monstrous in size. Sometimes the anomaly lies in the proportion itself. The next observer believes she saw what looked like a tiny monkey-like creature on the road, only for huge wings to suddenly disappear. And the witness tells me, this is going to sound totally unbelievable, but I swear I saw something like a flying monkey last night. I was driving on a neighborhood street, the strange animal was on the road. I could see its head, and it looked like a monkey to me, but it was small, like the size of a prairie dog or gopher. I kept saying, what is that? I drove around it as it would not move, possibly dazed by the headlights. My friend thought it was a possum until we passed it, and we both said, that wasn't a possum. I quickly turned around, and all I saw were huge wings, way too big for that animal, flying away. Now, obviously, I said it had to be an hour or whatever it was. It just got snatched up by a giant owl. The problem is that this thing had a head and a neck, was standing on 2 feet, leaned forward, and stared right at the car and didn't move. I'm so confused as to what I saw, even though I was so close to it. I mean, I see owls all the time, big ones. I know what they look like. That thing on the road, if it was an owl, it was a mutant owl. Even if I admit it was probably an owl, its wings were still far too big for its size. I have no idea what I saw, but I swear it looked like a small monkey. Now, I live in Florida. Although I live near Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, there was a Walmart in South Florida where monkeys lived in a parking lot because the owners let them escape. It's possible it was a tiny monkey that escaped, although extremely unlikely. But wings? The whole thing was confusing. Now, I'll be honest with you. I never did like those damn flying monkeys in The Wizard of Oz. They used to freak me out as a kid. So, folks, what did that reader witness? Now, that account may sound almost absurd at first hearing, but that's often the nature of genuine witness testimony. People describe exactly what they think they saw, even though it sounds impossible. A small primate-like form, bipedal posture, oversized wing, and total lack of fit with any normal owl, possum, or escaped pet. These are the kind of reports that often get distorted too quickly, not because they lack sincerity, but because they just don't fit neatly into a category. Now, this next case takes us into the populated area of Boca Raton, where the witness repeatedly observed a tall gray figure emerging from the tree line at the same time over 3 consecutive evenings. Its movement was not human, not animal, and not easily compared to anything familiar, which is precisely what makes it so unsettling. So the witness tells me during August 14th, 15th, and 16th of 2017 in Boca Raton, Florida, I saw something reminiscent of a Slender Man. Obviously, the Slender Man's a creepy pasta, but it isn't Slender Man. There's a farm behind my house separated by a canal. The farm stretches maybe about 1,000 feet back before it hits the tree line. Now, a couple weeks ago, I was eating dinner and staring out at the farm. I was maybe 20 minutes until nightfall. I saw what looked like a really tall gray version of Gumby walk out of the tree line, take 2 really large lunges, and disappear back into the tree line. It was much too tall to be a person. It was flat, but its legs bent in a way that looked like a plank bending, like how a piece of wood bows when the weight is applied, but springs back when the weight's removed. Its body, as far as I could see, was rigid. It didn't look flexible aside from the legs, and the limbs were fairly wide. The next night, at the same time, the same exact thing happened, except my parents were with me. It walked on 2 legs, but it was more like lunges or arching steps than a human walking. I asked them what they saw, if they saw that, and they said, "Saw what?" Then it happened again the 3rd night. So either my body is giving me random hallucinations in sync with my body's time clock, or there's something weird, or some type of weird slender Gumby man thing living on the farm behind our house. I haven't been home much recently, so I haven't been able to look for it again. But if I am, I haven't seen whatever it was since those 3 times, and couldn't get a photo of it because it was so far away. Its movements and stride were consistently the same all 3 days, and it happened at the same time each night. I've yet to venture to the farm to look at the area that I saw, but when I do, I'll take photos of anything that looks interesting or out of the ordinary. This was in the middle of a very populated city, so seeing something that outlandish in a human-heavy area was quite strange. Now, look, I heard back from the witness about a year ago, and they have not seen this thing since the original sighting, so I don't know what it was. Now, repetition is one of the strongest features in anomalous testimony. One odd glance can be dismissed. 3 appearances at the same time with the same movement pattern begins to suggest something structured rather than random. Now, in this Boca Raton case, the witness described a tall, rigid form moving in a long, bending strides, almost like a living board or articulated figure. It was not just strange in appearance, it moved according to a body logic that didn't just seem natural. Now, this brings us to the final account, one of the most disturbing in the collection. At Kissimmee Prairie Preserve and later near West Palm Beach, the witness not only encountered a dark-winged humanoid multiple times, but also bore physical markings afterwards, including a tar-like substance on their face and in her hair. So the witness says, in 2017, I had an encounter here in Florida in the darkest point of our state for stargazing and seeing the Milky Way. I heard a scary, loud, roar-like screech, unlike anything I've ever heard. It felt something brush up against me. I ran into my car and locked the door. It was pitch black. My boyfriend and I drove away in a panic, and when we went to recover at a nearby gas station, he said, "What's on your face and hair?" Now, it was a tar-like black substance that seemed to have been scratched across my face and into my hair. It was so hard to get off. I had to scrape it off my face with my fingernails. The area in my hair that had just had to be cut off. Within the same month, I saw it again a few times. It always occurred when I was around this boyfriend. It would always come from behind me. I truly think it was warning me about my boyfriend. Now, once I broke up with this guy, it never came back around me again, and it hasn't since. Now, I have heard of the Mothman, and when I explained the series of encounters to my brother, he asked me to draw it. And when I showed him the drawing, he freaked out and started Googling Mothman to show it to me. I was blown away. It matched my drawing almost to a T. Has anyone else ever been marked? Well, I asked the witness to call me for more details about this encounter. The initial incident occurred at Kissimmee Prairie Reserve State Park in Okeechobee County, Florida, on October 18, 2017. Now, at that time, the witness only noticed a large dark mass with reddish-orange lights or eyes. Now, she could not make out much detail, but was stunned when it brushed against her. She stated that the substance was a tar-like and sticky, but with no odor. She literally had to scrape it off her face with her fingernails. She tried to wash it out of her hair, but eventually had to cut it out. Too bad, because she didn't keep the sample of the substance. Now, the other 3 encounters occurred within a month's time. Each incident happened in the vicinity of her home in West Palm Beach, Florida, approximately 100 miles southeast of the original encounter location. She got a better look at this winged humanoid, which she described as 6 to 6.5 foot tall and black. The body was somewhat thin, with arms and legs that were not attached to the wings. The hands had long, thin fingers with claw-like nails. The legs and feet seemed to be fused together, though it was enough foot width in order to stand. The head was small, with what looked like hair-like stubble and large oval reddish-orange eyes. There were no other discernible features on the face that she could make out. The wings were long and draped over and away from the body. It reminded her of a cape-like membrane that extended to the ground. Now, she never actually saw it use its wings, and it seemed to descend smoothly. It would always appear behind her, scaring her and her boyfriend each time. And when it ascended, it did so quickly, making a roaring screech. Now, she believes that this winged humanoid was somehow warning her of a potential danger involving her boyfriend. After they broke up, the winged being never returned. Now, this last case pulls together several of the recurring elements that we've heard throughout Florida. Sudden appearance, red or reddish orange eyes, a sense of targeted proximity, repeated encounters over time, and in this instance, possible physical trace evidence, however fleeting. Whether one interprets the entity as a warning presence, a predatory intelligence, or something altogether outside conventional categories, the witness was left convinced that this being's appearances were connected to a dangerous chapter in her life. Now, taken together, these Florida reports do not point to a single creature type or one tidy explanation. It suggests a region rich in recurring anomalies where winged humanoids, phantom canines, upright felines, and strange aquatic entities and impossible forms continue to surface and witness testimony. That is what makes Florida such an important landscape in this larger unexplained phenomena. It does not offer one mystery, it offers many, and some of them may be connected. Now, after hearing these 9 encounters, it becomes difficult to dismiss Florida as something or simply another regional hotspot for odd stories. What emerges instead is a portrait of a state alive with recurring anomalies. Winged humanoids appeared in more than one form and in more than one location. Massive canines and impossible predators are reported in wooded corridors and roadside encounters. Unseen aquatic presences leave witnesses shaken long after they leave the water. And perhaps most unsettling of all, several of these reports carry an emotional or physical weight that goes beyond mere sighting testimony. Fear in animals, lingering marks, repeated appearances, and the sense of being deliberately observed all suggest that some of these encounters may involve more than an unknown animal identified in bad light. That's where a careful investigation becomes so important. The goal is not to force every account into a single theory, nor to sensationalize what we do not yet understand. The goal is to listen, compare, document, and identify recurring details that surface across time and geography. Florida offers an extraordinary range of territory or terrain and witness backgrounds, yet certain patterns continue to repeat. Humanoid forms, predatory intelligence, silence in the environment, deep unease, physical proximity. These are markers that deserve attention, especially when they arise in testimony from people who had nothing to gain from coming forward. And perhaps that's the real takeaway from tonight's program. The unexplained in Florida does not seem limited to one creature type, belief system, or a region. It appears as a spectrum, one in which cryptid reports, paranormal manifestation, and possibly ultra-terrestrial phenomena may overlap in ways that we simply don't fully grasp. Some of these witnesses may have encountered flesh and blood anomalies. Others may have crossed paths with something more elusive, more intelligent, and less easily defined. Whatever the truth may be, these experiences remain part of a larger mystery that continues to unfold in the shadows of one of America's strangest states. For those of us who have spent time studying these reports, the lesson is clear. We have to keep watching the patterns, keep speaking with witnesses, and keep comparing cases that at first seem unrelated. Because sometimes the strongest evidence does not come from one dramatic event. It comes from the slow accumulation of testimony, detail by detail, until pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Florida may be offering exactly that type of pattern, and if so, then we have covered tonight is not the end of the story. It may only be the beginning. Now, if you've experienced anything like this or had an unexplained encounter or sighting, you can send your report to me at Phantoms and Monsters. And as always, thanks for listening. So let's start the questions and answers, and type your questions in all caps too, please. Okay, I see Race Fan. I don't know if it has a name. I'm not that far from Mount St. Helens. What? I don't know what that was. Blue Cruise, do you get a large amount of various cryptid reports from the Ocala National Forest? Yeah, I have in the past. mostly Bigfoot-like creatures, but we had a lot of wing anomalies too. I used to. There was a woman who used to live right on the edge of the park, who had a home there, and she used to tell me about a lot of weird anomalies. She had a lot of. That's Marion County, I think. She had a lot of strange sightings of unknown beings, and as well as some type of possibly it could have been Glimmerman sightings. But Ocala is one of the strangest places in the state, and a state that's got a lot of strange places. Dagnammit, near the Falkland Islands, this mysterious black goo was found floating in the ocean, taken to get research as scientists analyzing the substance were dying from suicide. Yeah, I never heard that account before. If you have a link, send it to me. Can't Squatch, do you get many giant owl reports? Yeah, I do. But it's a nationwide thing. It's just not concentrated in Florida, but I do get a lot of them. I got a lot of them here in Pennsylvania as well. But, what I think I'm going to do, and that's if I get some good feedback going, is just concentrate on a few states every once in a while where I get a lot of weird, sightings. So if that's what you want me to do, I can do that. But that's up to you all. Jose Sanchez, when was the most recent skunk ape sighting in Florida? I don't know. I mean, the most recent one I got was about a year ago. It was near Mayaca, which is, outside of Clearwater or Tampa area, just east of it. But there's a lot going on there. Can Squash, do you get many reports from Mayaca State Park? Yeah. And there's a lot of people that see a lot of different types of beings. Of course, there have been times, and I've seen footage of these skunk apes that are literally in groups run through the fields and stuff during the daylight. And they're not AI, they're not CG. I mean, they're real images, and there's like sometimes there's multiple witnesses at the same time seeing it and commenting on the sightings. Anything else? Okay, folks. Well, I want to thank you for coming in here tonight, and as always, stay aware, stay safe, and as always, just keep looking into the unexplained. Have a nice evening. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your Easter holiday, and I'll see you next week. Good night.